Okay. I'm not very photogenic.
Everyone said that.
Roger. Ready?
My name's Stephen Glazer. I'm the faculty director of the CITRIS Big Bet on Intelligent Infrastructure, and I'd like to welcome the audience both here and online to the inaugural lecture for the Intelligent Water Infrastructure series. And the series is co-hosted by the Berkeley Water Center. Our next speaker will be on November 10th. It'll be Professor Soroush Sarushian of UC Irvine. To get started, a couple of announcements. The I for Energy talks will continue on Friday, where we have Igor Mezic speaking on how to measure energy efficiency in buildings. And also the Big Ideas Student Proposal Competition has $45,000 to give out, and there are flyers in the back of the room for those of you interested. So the Intelligent Water Infrastructure Initiative is part of the big bet that CITRIS has made on intelligent infrastructure. As Californians, we all know that water is very important and fundamental to society, so adding an intelligence would be quite a victory. The CITRIS Infrastructure Initiative wants to produce a water management tool as part of the fruits of our academic research. And this is a tool to allow all levels of decision makers to have real-time information of how much water do we have in the state, where's the water, what's the water doing. And this will allow us to have better use of our resources, better economic use of the resources, and hopefully we might even have a higher level of debate on state water issues. So we want to look at the water quantity system, the whole system, from the snowy mountains to the aquifers to the delta, as part of a cyber-physical system where we can use the IT tools such as wireless sensor networks and massive computing in order to give us a model that, let's say, the dam operator will be able to optimize in real time the amount of water that's going to hydro generation, flood control, or irrigation. And we look forward to having you here week after week on our lectures so you can share with us, the guests, as they help us visualize what this infrastructure system might look like. So today we're very honored to have Dr. Timothy Quinn as our speaker. He's Executive Director of the Association of California Water Agencies, and this is an association of 450 public water associations, and they're responsible for about 90% of the state's water. Dr. Quinn has 25 years of experience in water issues. He's worked on many key issues and initiatives over the years. Initiatives such as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, the 2002 Sacramento Valley Water Management Agreement, the 2000 Cal-Fed Record of Decision, 1995 Monterey Agreement, and the 1994 Bay Delta Accord. Prior to joining ACWA, Dr. Quinn was Deputy General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and he was Project Manager at the RAND Corporation. He's earned his doctorate in economics from UCLA in 1983. So with that, I'll give the floor to Dr. Quinn.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it. So I have to apologize not only for being late, but for being a Bruin. Again, I do apologize for being late. Just got hung up in the Capitol and jumped in my car 10 minutes later than I intended to jump in my car. I'm very pleased, though, to be here on the topic of intelligent infrastructure. Maybe it used to be called smart infrastructure, probably other adjectives before that. California has always had an abiding interest in intelligent infrastructure. The definition of intelligence, however, changes from one generation to another. And I'm living some of those changes. I do not pretend to stand here having the answers for you today, but I will give you try to share with you my angle on some of these questions and how I'm watching them evolve as I try and function in some kind of positive way to move California policy along. Let's see, there we go. There we go. I like to start to talk about infrastructure with a tribute to those that preceded us. That's a picture of Pat Brown and John F. Kennedy. I think it's June of 1963. They're dedicating San Luis Reservoir, a large 2 million acre-foot facility that you'll see if you're driving is it the 152 over the hill down into Los Banos? You can't miss this reservoir. It's a key part of the state water project. In those days, again, this was over 50 years ago, or about 50 years ago, the name of the game was build infrastructure to supply water at the lowest possible cost to a growing economy. That's what drove public policy in those days, and intelligent infrastructure was infrastructure that got that job done. That infrastructure, of course, I've got another half-hour presentation on this topic, ran into a lot of trouble. This is a federal, my staff put it as Judge Wanger's courtroom. It's not necessarily Judge Wanger's courtroom. It's a federal courtroom. I don't think it's in Fresno. But the judge here is symbolic of the environmental issues that arose as we pursued that intelligent infrastructure policy that was based around pretty much a single primary policy goal of low-cost supply for a growing economy. Today, and again, I could go into great length on this, in 2009, a modern-day political miracle occurred. By the way, you always get sausage out of the sausage factory in Sacramento. Sometimes it's pretty good sausage. And I would strongly argue that in 2009, we got some pretty good law about water policy out of the state of California. Again, I won't take you through the details of it. I've got other goals in mind for the next half hour or so. But the California water law, because of those 5 bills, there were 4 policy bills and a water bond that I'll talk briefly about later on. The central tenet of California water law today is that we're going to manage the system for, quote, co-equal goals, end quote. Now, everyone in this room will have a different definition of what co-equal goals is in specifics. In the legislature, it means managing the system for both the restoration of the Delta ecosystem, the Delta is the hub of our water supply system, and improving water supply reliability at the same time. Sounds simple enough, but it's really complex, and I think we will look back in a half century, and that will have been a meaningful statement. We have been evolving towards the principle of co-equal goals, I would argue, throughout my entire career. It spans about 30 years at this point in time. But this was a definite policy statement that we're going to manage the system for both goals, environment and economy, in the same process at the same time, simultaneously. We have never done that before, and it will take us years to figure out how to do it this time around. The legislature recognized that co-equal goals would require comprehensive solutions, and that was also a first. Up until this point in time, the environmentalists would argue the only problem is we don't conserve enough. My folks would argue the only problem is we haven't built the right dams or enough of them in the right place. But as the legislature struggled with this concept of a system that's going to provide co-equal goals, it came down to the conclusion that you have to check the box next to all of the above. You have to do local resource investment in more substantial quantities than my members would have been comfortable with a couple of decades ago, and even more than even the most aggressive of them think they need to do today. That alone isn't going to solve the problem. I have another half hour on Delta conveyance solutions. This is a map of the Delta showing 3 alternative ways in which you might change how water moves through the Delta to get through the California economy. And the legislation didn't make a decision about this large infrastructure question, but it was clearly laying the foundation for other processes to Bay Delta Conservation Plan is a permitting process under the Endangered Species Act where this issue is being wrestled with on a day-to-day basis. That was to be coupled with storage solutions under an increasingly intuitive understanding that timing is at least as important as the amount of water that's being moved. And you need to change to a true, what we sometimes call gulp-sip strategy, so that you're taking the water when conflict is minimum and you're not taking water when conflict is greater. And all that needs to be tied, of course, with habitat restoration expenses. All of this together is going to cost billions of dollars. I want to talk about that in some detail later on. Now, my organization supports the entire comprehensive program. I spend a lot of my time on the road in Northern California explaining why even when your water is cheap and abundant, you have to be practicing conservation and water use efficiency in the state of California. So I'm all over I spent much of my career putting ratepayer dollars into habitat programs in Northern California. I am all over supporting the left-hand side of this slide that you're looking before you. But what I want to focus you on today is the right-hand side, the infrastructure side, and how we have to think about the infrastructure side for comprehensive solutions. It's by far, I think, the more challenging. It's certainly the more controversial side of this slide that's in front of you. And I will tell you that my own thoughts have changed dramatically in the last couple of decades and even in the last year or two. I want to give you some of my perspectives. I want to do a little thought perspective with you. Recently, Aqua sponsored a tour to look at some of the new intake facilities on the Sacramento River. I had an aha experience a couple of months ago. I want to share it with you. I was walking out to this facility. This is the new intake facility on the Sacramento River for the city of Sacramento. I would encourage those of you who are really into water policy, I would encourage you to physically repeat my aha experience. It's not hard to find. You get off Interstate 5 just as you're, from the airport, you're coming into Sacramento at Richardson Boulevard. Turn towards the river and you'll find this structure. You can't miss it. You look towards the river and it sits there big as life. It's a very large structure, maybe 150 feet long, sticks out of the river 100 feet high. It cost $33 million to construct. It went into operation in 2005. When we were on this tour, I asked the tour guide, well, what's the capacity? I'm a water guy. What's the capacity of this? How much water is moving into the city of Sacramento system? The answer was approximately 160 million gallons a day. It's what the city needs in its treatment plant for serving much of the city of Sacramento. The aha experience came to me when I looked upstream. If you look upstream a few hundred feet away, this is what you'll see. Now, I'm an economist, not an engineer. Somebody had to tell me that was the old intake structure before the new intake structure for the city of Los Angeles. Look at that simple concrete device. It's not small, except in comparison what's immediately downstream. It's maybe 20 feet wide. It sticks out of the river 25, 30 feet high. It would have cost maybe in today's dollars 1/10 of what the new intake structure costs. And I asked the architect who was our tour guide, what is the capacity of that little intake structure? The answer was 160 million gallons a day. The two structures are identical with respect to their water supply function. You didn't add a thing to the water supply capabilities of the city of Sacramento when you built that facility that was 10 times bigger. Why was it so much bigger? Because it was designed and constructed to meet the requirements of coequal goals. Almost all of its physical dimensions are driven by the requirements for fish screens. The fish screens, to be effective, have to be quite large. They're large to reduce the flow-by rates so that fish don't get impinged and are free to stay in the river. So a couple of lessons occurred to me that day in that aha experience. One of them at the top of this chart is infrastructure is really important to accomplishing coequal goals. The notion of trying to separate, to do the economic job and the environmental job at the same time got really expensive. The new facility was 10 times more expensive than the old facility. That was the second lesson. Coequal infrastructure is really, really expensive. That same day, we went a little, I should have gotten to the coequal goals are really expensive with better timing. I'm sorry. That same day, we went down the river maybe 5 miles. This is East Bay Muds. East Bay Municipal Utility District. They're the supplier for Berkeley, amongst other places in the East Bay. $120 million intake. What struck me about this, I'm a veteran of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I guess maybe my third apology to this audience today. What struck me about this was its size. Its capacity is 345 cubic feet per second. I was quite familiar with the Colorado River aqueduct system of the Metropolitan Water District, which is housed in facilities that are about the same size. So the East Bay Mud facility was the same size as the pumping plants of on the Colorado River aqueduct, but their capacity is 1,800 cubic feet per second, 5 times bigger. Once again, why? Why is this one so much bigger, so much more expensive for the water supply job that it's doing? It's because it was driven to meet co-equal goals. Both noise requirements, it's located in a suburban neighborhood. They didn't worry about noise as much in 1960 or 1940 when the MWD system was built as you do today. But mainly the cost of that facility were driven once again by the need to protect the fishery. And by the way, I'm not saying we shouldn't protect the fishery because it's so expensive to do so. I'm just driving home this point. Co-equal infrastructure looks a lot different than infrastructure that was built only for water supply, for low-cost water supply. You can go up and down the Sacramento River. These are the intakes at the Glen Cluse Irrigation District. You can drive up and look at them. They're located in Hamilton City, California. 2 intakes for Reclamation District 108. All of these facilities were very large, very expensive. We've pretty much fully screened the Sacramento River and the Feather River, and none of these screens had any water supply function. They were all being built at very large cost. Many of them required public subsidy to get done because there was no private benefit to the local area, a theme I will get back to in a little while. Again, co-equal infrastructure looks a lot different from single-purpose infrastructure. One of my favorite examples is on Butte Creek. Butte Creek runs in just south of the city of Chico. It's tributary to the Sacramento River, just above where the Feather River hits the Sacramento. And when the system was built for the primary, this is rice country, by the way, when the system was built for low-cost water supply, there were a series of 12 dams on Butte Creek. This is one of them. It's called Western Canal Dam. About 5 or 6 feet high. It had no real conservation value. It didn't create supply. It was there as part of the distribution system. The water would come in from the east side, from the Feather River. They would park it behind this dam so it was at the right level to siphon it off to the rice growers on the west side of Butte Creek. Well, that was obviously a problem for spring run salmon. A listed species, this is historically their habitat, and they couldn't get past this and 12 other dams. By the early 1990s, spring run counts going back up into Butte Creek were down into the less than 200s. There were so few fish, they were naming the individuals. And that's actually not a joke. The Fish and Game guy up there actually named fish. So what was the answer to this problem? Infrastructure. That's in construction, a $10 million siphon that now carries that water under the creek, so you no longer need to put it in the creek to get it over. The farmer wound up with a better distribution system. It's more reliable for him, for his water supply. The fish got back eventually 25 miles of habitat. And this, by the way, that's the very same stretch of river that the Western Canal Dam used to cover. And the answer was intelligent infrastructure. I couldn't give you a better example than to go up, get to know the people at Western Canal Water District and some of the other farmers up there who have completely changed their infrastructure system, converting it from single-purpose, low-cost supply to multi-purpose, co-equal goals. They have maintained water supply reliability. We now get spring run salmon up, and they managed it. One year there were 20,000 adults trying to get up there to spawn. That was the good news. The bad news was there was only spawning habitat for 10,000. So they tried to manage it in the 5,000 to 10,000 range. And even during the recent bad ocean conditions where runs everywhere else were way down, they were keeping them within that range on a place where we had gone from single-purpose infrastructure to intelligent infrastructure to accomplish co-equal goals. There is, of course, I'm only going to spend, this is the other 2 boxes in the diagram. I said we can focus on infrastructure, but I have to point out that infrastructure in the user areas has exploded. This is a desalination facility in Southern California and recycling plant also in Southern California. One recycling project in Orange County has become very famous and notably so. It cost $480 million, just that one project. One desalination plant in Carlsbad, California, $280 million. This is, if you want to know why my members are going through a lot of political upheaval because they're raising rates, it's if you want to produce co-equal goals, there is no course towards lower water rates for the people of California or any place else that's pursuing co-equal goals. Haven't talked much, won't talk a lot of detail about the Delta. Now, this is a little bigger version of that map I showed you earlier that was on one of 4. In a nutshell, the problem in the Delta is the pumps are located in the southern end, and when you turn them on, the rivers run in the wrong direction, and that is not good for the fish. amongst other problems in the Delta. But that is fundamentally a function of infrastructure that was never improved because it just didn't pencil out. Well, it'll pencil out now in the future with some of the Endangered Species Act decisions. But to fix that problem, which is driven by considerations of earthquake preparedness, et cetera, but the driving consideration is transforming the system into one that will handle co-equal goals and get rid of that conflict with fisheries. It will cost $8 to $12 billion, depending upon which alternative they wind up choosing. This is again happening in something called the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and HCP, NCCP, for those of you who know your Endangered Species Act law, trying to get an ESA permit for Delta facilities and Delta operations for our largest water projects. And I haven't talked much about storage. Storage is the most controversial infrastructure in the state of California. And I will tell you, it would be hard for me to communicate to you how much my own views have changed from an academic economist going to work for the Metropolitan Water District in 1985 to a spokesman for the water industry today. This system will not function for co-equal goals without more and better infrastructure, just very different infrastructure operated in a very different way from what we had historically. And again, I don't have the definitive proof. Frankly, we haven't thought it through yet. But I would point out that if you don't think our storage infrastructure is important for fish, you're just flat wrong. Today, every decision that they make at this place, this is Shasta Reservoir up on the Sacramento River, that system is operated as much for temperature and flows for the fish as it is for water supply. You're operating that infrastructure in radically different ways today than you did before because you're trying to make it do double duty, co-equal goals, water, not just water supply, but also managing it for the well-being of the fishery. And the environmental interests, the fish regulators and the water supply operators, they argue every day because we don't have enough infrastructure to accomplish both goals the way it is today. Below the Delta, San Luis Reservoir I mentioned before, this is where John Kennedy and Pat Brown were some half a century ago. Let me give you just one example. Not too many years ago, the Delta smelt behaved unusually. They're a listed species also, by the way. Normally the smelt are out of the Delta by mid-April, and the rules for operating the big projects are you can start pumping when they're gone. And so they plan on pumping in mid-April through pretty much the fall. I think it was year 2000, I could be wrong about the year, but about that time frame, the Delta smelt, for reasons I'm an economist, not a biologist, don't understand, they stayed until almost mid-July. And so when the pumps were supposed to be going at around 10 grand CFS, they were cut back to like 1,500. That is an enormous walloping wacko to your water supply. How did we keep our economy going? We didn't call it co-equal goals, but we had an economy to keep going. How did we do that? Storage. We pulled water like crazy out of San Luis Reservoir. At a time when we would not, otherwise we would have been filling San Luis Reservoir during much of this period. We were operating that infrastructure for co-equal goals, and we got lucky because that fall was pretty wet. So we recovered storage in San Luis. If it had been dry, we'd had a water supply crisis on our hand because we didn't have a system that was up to the challenge of co-equal goals. A big chunk of my career has been in developing a different approach to storage. These are 3 storage projects developed not by the state or federal government, who haven't built anything of size for decades. The Quinn water bank is the aerial vision there on the left. Los Vaqueros expansion, which is not very far from here, built and operated by the Contra Costa Water District, and Diamond Valley Lake on the right. Those are 3 examples of how storage has been brought to bear to try and move the system towards the concept of co-equal. Although I would emphasize these were all what I would call reactionary storage facilities. The fishery decisions were made independently of what you could do for fish and water supply together. These things were reactions to exogenous regulatory decisions. And although it was kind of interesting, and again, I was heavily involved in developing water banking potential in Kern County. I was at Metropolitan when they were building the Diamond Valley Lake, the structure on the right. And it was interesting to me at the time how the role of storage was dramatically changing as we started to change the rules on how to operate for the environment. In the 1950s, when those contracts for the State Water Project were signed, the The storage was, of course, hugely important. Anticipated storage was very large when you signed your contract. The storage was going to be on North Coast rivers, not in the Sierra. They were tapped out, but it was going to be the Eel River, then the Mad River, then the Trinity River, then the Klamath River. All of those storage were written into the 1956 California Water Plan, and you were going to get the water up there during wet years, and then when it was dry and people had demands under their contracts, you would move the water when it's dry. So that was the storage paradigm circa 1956, 1960. It was dams on live streams in Northern California, move the water when it's wet. Boy, have we dramatically changed that storage paradigm today. Those recent projects that I mentioned moved the storage. They moved it south and they moved it offstream. Frankly, none of you ought to want to go up and build the reservoirs that were planned in 1956. Let's leave those North Coast rivers for the salmon and for the ecosystem. But we couldn't operate the system without storage, so we started moving storage south of the delta, closer to the end user, and you move the water when it's wet, not when it's dry. All of those had important positive effects for living, again, reacting to a world in which you'd lost your dry year water, and you were trying to make up for that loss of dry year water by accessing the system when it was wet. It was a huge step forward, but I do not believe that's the storage paradigm of the future. But I can't put it into a nutshell because we haven't figured it out just yet. I do believe in the 21st century we have to make all this decision-making endogenous. We have to make it simultaneous. How do we think about our infrastructure and how it's operated? And how do we measure outcomes of co-equal goals and start designing a system around co-equal goals, not just cheap water supply or what do the fish need? Look at them together and design a system that can accomplish maximum output when you look at the joint objectives of ecosystem restoration and water supply reliability. And I believe you're going to get very different answers out of a system when you ask those kinds of questions. Well, I want to change gears. That's all about the physical infrastructure and how the need for physical infrastructure is changing dramatically. I want to talk a little bit about some things more related to how you pay for this stuff because it's a huge challenge. And I'm going to argue that co-equal goals blurs the lines that connect projects and beneficiaries. And to make that point, let me take you again back a half century. I spent a lot of my career in the administration of and the operations of the State Water Project. It's big, it's complex. They built, that's Oroville Reservoir. They built a huge pumping plant in the South Delta. They built 600 miles, the San Luis Reservoir, 600 miles of man-made rivers to move large volumes of water around the state. It's big, it's complex, but it wasn't all that hard to finance. And that's because in the days of single-purpose projects, your primary purpose was to produce something an economist can relate to as a private good. It would go into public agencies by and large, but it was molecules of water that were excludable. You could write contracts for who's going to get how many of those molecules of water. The water supply was something you could build a finance package around, and they did. The State Water Project and its financing is a model of beneficiary pays infrastructure. The cost allocations in the contracts are complex, but they tracked who was going to get what and what did it take to get it to them. In a world where water supply, a private, excludable thing, is your primary output, we were able to draw bold lines between project beneficiaries and projects and get them funded and move them forward. And one of the consequences of, whoops, hit the wrong button. One of the consequences of that system, though, was we were managing, that's the bold lines connecting projects and beneficiaries. I'm sorry about the timing. One of the consequences of that, though, was we had created a system in which we were managing everything in silos. If you think back about it, how did the world work in the middle of the 20th century? You found a watershed that had unappropriated water that looked like it would have the right kind of economic characteristics. You hired your engineers, you hired your lawyers, you designed and built your project. You got your water rights as the State Water Resources Control Board. Those projects were being built for this private good water supply, and you typically, through an appropriative right of one sort or another, you moved that water to where you were going to use it, and you were prepared to pay for it, and then, by God, you went into your bunker and you protected your water right from everybody and all outsiders. We were definitely managing the system in bunkers. If you're going to accomplish co-equal goals, those silos have got to go. You have got to integrate the system and operate the system as a whole, which is a very different culture and mode of operation from what my colleagues are used to. And that means if you want to build one of these are 3 projects that are on the table that have been talked about a lot. CITRIS Reservoir, upper left, Los Vaqueros expansion, which is being expanded as we speak. And there's a second expansion if Contra Costa Water District can find partners to expand it again. Groundwater banking, the Temperance Flat on the right. If you want to build one of these, you had better be able to explain to the California Water Commission and others how it would affect the operation of these reservoirs. Those are the existing reservoirs at Shasta, Oroville, Folsom, and San Luis. Because if we don't figure out how to operate an integrated system as a whole for the co-equal goals together, we're going to fail in this noble experiment that we started with in the 2009 legislation. But that, of course, means that the lines between project beneficiaries are a lot less clear than they used to because there's so much publicness going on in this new bundle of outputs. We're not producing just water supply, it's water supply, and you're integrating your projects geographically with those that you didn't have to do that before to produce temperature and flows for fish and a long list of other public benefits which are not excludable, which people can, the public at large benefits from. They're important benefits, but we're having a real challenge figuring out how to finance them. So your project integration is essential. You're going to have to operate those projects for co-equal goals, and we don't have the same bold lines, at least for the public benefit portion of a co-equal infrastructure package. So in summary, before we move to money in specifically, infrastructure is the things, takeaway points I've got for you so far today. Infrastructure is going to be more important, not less important, for accomplishing co-equal goals in the future. Co-equal goals infrastructure is really expensive, really expensive. Infrastructure is going to have to be more integrated. You can't allow people to operate their projects just for the service areas that they were designed to operate, which means you're moving benefits away from the people that originally built those projects. Or for a project in the future, somebody who will build projects in the futures. That is, infrastructure is more important, it's more expensive, it's more public. It's producing a set of services that have got a lot of public benefits to them, a lot of publicness to them, and you're not going to be able to finance that the way you finance your old infrastructure. We're going to have to come up with something new. Because the lines between the projects and the beneficiaries are blurred. And all of this, of course, is going to raise huge challenges to how we plan and execute intelligent infrastructure in the 21st century in California. Switching gears again, let's talk a little bit about money. And by the way, I'm not here to put, there's a bond on the ballot coming out of that 2009 legislation in November 2012. I'm not here to tout the bond. But I do want to explain the logic of the bond. Again, it comes from this notion. The bond was written by 2 legislators who are both gone now, by the way. Thank you, term limits, or in the case of Dave Cogdill, just ugly politics. Cogdill was a Republican from Modesto. Caballero was a Democrat from Salinas. This water legislation that I've mentioned was remarkably bipartisan. Everything passed with 2/3 votes out of both houses. They passed with 2/3 of the Republicans and 2/3 of the Democrats voting for them in the legislature. I don't believe any other major legislation can say that. Like I've been doing this for 25 years, and I can't remember it ever happening that way. Usually, if you want a 2/3 vote, you figure out you got all the Democrats and then get the 2 Republicans that you need. This was not that way with this legislation. It was very broadly supported, and it was recognized at some level. Again, the sausage factory doesn't take all of this stuff up to the analytical level and think of it the way you would at the University of California, Berkeley. But at some level, the politics recognized that there was a lot of public investment that was going to be required to make certain key things happen in this legislation. And this bond came out of that kind of, and by the way, bond politics is not pretty politics. I've been involved with every water bond going back to Jim Costa's 204, Prop 13, Prop 50, Prop 84. This one, I was at all of those negotiating tables. And some of the ugly things you hear about our system are in fact true, but sometimes they do actually produce a pretty good product. Which is not to say the voters will vote for it. If you look at the bond, there are dozens and dozens of appropriations. I'm going to skip right past that and talk a little bit about, In this package, as we were struggling with how do you come up with the private and the public portions of an overall financing program, I want to point out what the bond doesn't pay for and what it does pay for. The bond does not pay a penny for conveyance infrastructure. That would have to be paid for by the people who are going to convey water through that system. The bond doesn't pay any of the water supply benefits in what became Chapter 8 of the bond. That's money for public benefits from storage. It was odd. I mean, I'm the water supply guy representing the public agencies, and I was the guy arguing in the negotiations in the legislature that water supply should not be listed as a public benefit of a storage project because it's a private benefit. And you should finance it as a private benefit. My members should pay for that water supply through their rate structures and other means. But you had the very large challenge of how are you going to pay for the public's interest in that new infrastructure, which has a lot of publicness in it, which you want to integrate with other projects that the old system wouldn't take care of. The waters and ratepayers were going to pay for the private side. You were left with the challenge of what do you finance on the public side. And the answer, again, through this imperfect political process that gives you bonds, came out this way. The public was going to pay for three things in this $11.14 billion bond. Those things were, first and foremost, local resource development. Local resources are really expensive. People have a tendency to want to import the water because even though environmentalists will tell you that the local water is the cheapest, it's just not true. The local water from a lot of those sources of supply is very expensive. You want to make sure it happens to a degree it's not going to. So we have for a decade now subsidized local water resource development. We've been doing it very successfully with an explosion in the development of local water supply resources, and this bond would continue that. $4 billion for habitat and watersheds, $3 billion only for the, again, I've got another half-hour presentation on this, but only for the public benefits. There's an attempt to define what public means, to put processes in place to make sure that those public benefits would accrue from developing intelligent infrastructure. I don't think most of the legislators working on these bills would necessarily realize it if you asked them, but at the time it was very clear to me and to a number of others that we were struggling with this. How do we make sure that we get a different kind of intelligent infrastructure coming out of these things? And the one way to make sure is that the money only flows if you're meeting new definitions of what intelligent infrastructure is, and that was the blatant strategy in the bond when it came to storage. That bond is expected to leverage $20 to $30 billion in private capital. I put private capital in question marks because most of that comes from my public agencies, but they're delivering this private good to an economist, this private excludable good, water supply. And in a lot of places, the public money is really important, whether it's from a bond or something else. The public money is really important because it will trigger and leverage investments. For example, all of the local resource money in that first $4 billion has to have a match. Our experience is that those dollars match, that the bond dollar will leverage $3 to $4 from my member agencies, so you wind up spending $3 or $4 or $5 instead of just one. The same thing was true for virtually all of this. In the habitat, $2 billion of the habitat dollars was to go for habitat restoration projects, which would be in the comprehensive permit that would be required to build new infrastructure in the Delta. You're not going to get there unless you spend big bucks on habitat restoration. I would strongly argue that that's a public obligation, not the obligation of the water supply agencies. Didn't have anything to do with the loss of that habitat in the first place. So very appropriate to have a public source for those dollars. And if you come up with that public source for the dollars, it makes the permit possible. It triggers the $8 to $12 billion of private investment for a facility that will be hard, if not impossible, to build if you don't attach it to those environmental assets that need a public source of funds. So let me turn to the question in here. This is maybe not quite appropriate for an academic audience, but I thought to leave it in here anyway. One of my jobs is to get people thinking differently about paying for intelligent infrastructure in the future. People are not happy about what's happening to their water rates, I might add, just in passing. My agencies are having to raise water rates because they're experiencing very large increases in costs as they transform their systems to meet coequal goals. And one question I think we're all ought to ask ourselves is, can we afford all this? Because it's not an $11 billion bond we're talking about. It's at least a $40 billion program over, let me say, a quarter century. When you add up new infrastructure in the Delta, storage that's there for intelligent storage that's operated for coequal goals, all that resource development that needs to happen where the end users use the water today, it's going to be at least a $40 billion price tag. And can we really afford that over the next 25 years? And I guess I would point out, these are just some comparables that my communication staff came up with. I asked them, well, how does this compare to what our grandparents did for us? Our grandparents spent 3 times per capita what we're contemplating here with that $40 billion. And that's only on the state and federal water projects. So when you adjust for population and inflation on a per capita basis, this is not nearly as large as the load our grandparents' generation was trying to lift. And they were only trying to lift for water supply, not for the coequal goals. Another way to think about it is the cost of water at the tap. That system that we built to deliver low-cost water delivers low-cost water. A gallon of tap water passes is healthful, et cetera. A gallon of that tap water that's flowing out of here, I don't know for sure if this for Berkeley, but on average in California costs $0.002. That is, yes, correct, 0.2 of 1 cent for a gallon of tap water. And again, I'm not trying to argue it's too cheap or that people should not use it wisely, but I do want to drive home that some of the core economics here suggest to me that we can probably move forward and afford to pay for some of this stuff. That gallon of tap water, if you compare it to a gallon of milk, same cost, you can buy 1,200 gallons of tap water for the cost of 1 gallon of milk. A gallon of gasoline, 2,000 gallons of tap water. One of my favorite comparisons, that bottle of water some of you probably have in front of you today. A gallon's worth of that bottle of water, you can buy 5,700 gallons of water from one of my member agencies for the same cost. To maybe overplay my hand, if you like a moderately priced glass of wine in the evening, a gallon of that wine, $45 worth, 22,500 gallons for the same cost. You could fill your swimming pool and your neighbor's swimming pool. Again, I don't want to argue here that water is too cheap. I do want to suggest, though, that if it were to go to from 0.2 of 1 cent per gallon to 3 or 4/10 of 1 cent per gallon, that's probably not something that puts the economy or the people of California in too compromising of a position. I think there's a lot of ability to pay. And I'm not, by the way, trying to substitute for more rigorous analysis doing benefit cost analysis here. I'm trying to communicate to a different audience that's raising heck with my members when they go and try and do what they need to do with water rates. The water bond itself is roughly the equivalent of 2 Bay Bridges that they're going to build to serve this regional economy. And again, I don't know if this sells or not, but when you look at the total amount of the bond, or again, not the bond, but if we came up with some other form, fee-based revenue streams that you could bond into to pay some of the private portion to make things happen, the cost of that $11 billion public financing is the equivalent of 3 additional bottles of water per household in the state of California. Again, and when we're done with all this, your water bill will still be considerably less than your electricity bill, your cable bill, or your mobile phone bill. The challenge, this is my summary slide, I'd be glad to take questions and comments. My organization strongly supports that comprehensive package. Not all elements of that package are easy for us. A lot of my members like the old low-cost water supply world. I mean, their job is water supply. And in a world that dominated being able to do it as cheap as possible, that wasn't bad for them. But I can't say unanimously, but the great preponderance of public agencies that deliver water in this state believe in their hearts in coequal goals, and they want a system that works for the environment as well as for water supply. But they do want a system that works for water supply, and that's at risk now. The package is going to require a broadly supported finance plan. Again, the legislature took a cut at it. That bond is controversial. Nobody knows for sure if it will pass, but if it doesn't pass, we have to figure something out. The finance plan, I believe, is going to have to reflect this growing publicness in 21st century California water policy. You have got to add a public finance element to the private finance elements that worked so well in the past. If you don't do that, the whole package will not be successful, in my judgment. If not this bond, then what? The governor has indicated he wants to talk about alternatives, and you don't say no to the governor. So I asked my board at my request has created a board level task force, and we are looking very hard at what kinds of alternatives to general obligation bond financing might we be, as a community, be able to support. And I believe that there will be some. Although I would point out to everybody in the room that changing that package requires a 2/3 vote, and so far Governor Governor Brown has not been able to secure a single Republican vote for any of his initiatives. So even if we can come up with a better idea, and a lot of people want to try, it's not clear that you can change what's on the ballot, because to change what's on the ballot, you need a 2/3 vote in the legislature. And any of those changes, just again, at the 100,000-foot level, for me to keep my job and for my board to support it, the changes are going to have to be consistent with implementing the whole package, moving forward with that comprehensive vision that we had in 2009. It's got to be consistent with the beneficiary pays principle, which everyone defines differently. But my members' voices should be fairly loud in that debate, since they are going to be expected to pay the vast majority of the bills. And any changes will have to be capable of securing a 2/3 vote in the legislature. So we're, welcome to the world of more publicness in intelligent infrastructure. I welcome comments, questions. I think I'm going to be having some quiet time with some of you after this, because we are still at the front end of figuring this out. And to the extent we have any time, Steve, I'd be glad to take questions.
Well, it's obvious from what we've heard today that there's a tremendous investment needs to be made in information technology to plan, to operate, to optimize these new systems. We'll take new models of collecting data in the physical sense, dealing with the data in our models, and then optimizing the information so that the operators can make use of the data. So we have time for questions.
Is this on? Oh, thank you, Tim, for your comments. I want to go back where you said you're going to talk about the right-hand side, not the left-hand side, because I was at a meeting a couple weeks ago with water folks in the Tulare area, and there was a general sense that what they called local soft options could never make up what they called the water supply losses that they've had over the past few years, and definitely they needed the hard options to do that. Have we fully explored or put on the table all of the local soft options? Have they yet to be discovered? And what are the impediments to implementing some of those? Are they political or technical or economic or financial or so forth?
A really good question, Roger. I'm sure it won't surprise you. It's a pretty complex one, too. In an agricultural area, my roots were big water agency, urban California. In an agricultural area, your opportunity for soft solutions on the supply side are very limited. Most farms, and the farmers in this state that get water that's conveyed across the Delta, their water costs 20 times what the guy across the road's water costs, maybe more times. And they're pretty efficient. They use that water very efficiently. In the areas where the water is cheap, it's cheap because they live right in a watershed where they could build low-cost reservoirs 100 years ago and collect that water. That water's cheap, but it's also in the watershed, so what you don't use stays in the system and it's used by somebody else downstream. So if you want demand management, demand reduction to solve the problem, you got to get the hard choices about telling these guys they can't grow crops. And most of them will fight that to the death, and they'll have me as an ally. So I don't really disagree with the core conclusion. I would point out that that part of California is not really looking to grow supply. They're looking to hang on to what they've historically had in a world of coequality. And I believe that if you invest in intelligent infrastructure, we can start accommodating both of those demands in ways that have much smaller impact on their water supplies and their economy than if you don't invest in that coequal infrastructure. So, but let me, my kicker comment is wherever those efficiencies are that make sense, we've got to pursue them. And I'm an economist by training. I represent public agencies out there in regional, and I'm a great favor of market-based systems and incentive-based systems for making that stuff happen. I was one of the developers of the Metropolitan Water District incentive plans back in the 80s. They called it the Conservation Credits Program and the Local Resources Program, where it was cash for better infrastructure, cash for lower water using infrastructure, whether it was toilets or recycling facilities. We've been using bond money in that way, and I would hope we find a way to continue incentivizing the level of demand reduction in local resource development that we need to be successful. I don't think you can regulate it.
Would you put some things like the Kern Water Bank in that local soft category, and can they do more of that?
Yes, the short answer is yes, we can, and I'd like to see more of that, but not just react. The Kern Water Bank is pretty much solely about water supply as a reaction to what had happened in the regulatory world. I want to see more Kern Water Banks, but I want to see them designed for co-equal goals, not as a reaction to an exogenous regulatory decision. We will need lots more groundwater storage and surface storage in the state of California to get to a true state of intelligent infrastructure.
Thank you. You use intelligent infrastructure a lot, and I'm curious, are we smart enough to be intelligent about our infrastructure?
Well, let me explain. I use the term because that's the term of the series. I'm quite comfortable with the term. I was comfortable with smart infrastructure 20 years ago, but it went out of vogue.
I think we've had a couple of legal decisions recently out of the courts that suggest we don't know what we're doing, particularly on fish, what makes fish successful. So to have these goals, these co-equal goals, there has to be some metric. Are we smart enough to have a metric that you can optimize the system?
If I'm restricted to one word answer, I'm going to say yes, as opposed to no. But either yes or no would be qualified. We're never 100% smart. We never achieve perfect information about the system. You've got the information that you've got. We've got a different policy direction than we had before. And while I think there will be great disputes over how to actually implement that vision of co-equal goals, I'd rather have that debate and be wrong as we're struggling towards co-equal goals than I would be to be wrong struggling towards what we were struggling towards before. And I would echo Steve's words a little while ago. There is a real demand here on our information technologies and our ability to develop, distribute, and use information. And we're not. So I certainly think we're smart enough to begin moving in this direction. And over time, we'll get smarter. We will never achieve the mountaintop of smartness because it doesn't exist. But I think we know enough. If part of the problem with what's coming out of the courts is no one is out there really thinking co-equal. You've got warring camps. I mean, it's going to take decades to change the culture. The old culture, the old silo culture, it encouraged warfare, and we get warfare. And those camps are not thinking about objective centrist, and neither one of them are thinking about objective centrist information. That'll get me in trouble with a few people I can think of. And somehow we need to create a culture where you're going to get together and look at information where you are jointly trying to solve each other's problems. We haven't quite got there yet. I think that political transformation is probably going to be essential for improving the quality and use of information.
Thank you.
Let's thank our guests.
Thank you very much. Once again, I apologize for being late.